The useless country girl was what my cousin called me 3 feet from my grandmother's casket. He said it with a smile, like it was an old family joke, like I hadn't spent 7 years changing her sheets, managing her pills, paying utility bills on time, and sitting beside her when she forgot what year it was. The funeral was barely over when my aunt asked the lawyer right there in the fellowship hall, "So when do we discuss the estate?" My brother laughed. "What estate?" My mother adjusted her scarf and said, "She left everything to Claire because Claire was the only one around. It's sentimental, not valuable." Then my cousin added, "The little maid just lost the only person who needed her." A few people smiled politely, the kind of smile people use when they don't want to get involved. I didn't say anything. I stood beside the coffee urn with my paper cup going cold in my hand. Then Mr. Adler, my grandmother's lawyer, opened one more document, and the entire room went silent. Now let me take you back. My name is Hannah. I'm 32. For the last 7 years I lived in the same quiet suburban house where my grandparents raised my mother and all her siblings. It wasn't a grand house, just an old one, white siding, blue shutters, a narrow driveway, a kitchen floor that creaked near the pantry, the kind of house people stop seeing because it's been there too long. My family called it Grandma's place with the tone people use for something outdated but harmless. I called it home. Not because I lacked imagination, because someone had to stay. When I was 25, I got into a state university 20 minutes from home. That became one of the family's favorite jokes. Hannah stayed local. Hannah was never really a city girl. Hannah likes small things. That was their polished version. The unpolished one was simpler. They thought I stayed because I couldn't leave. Because I wasn't ambitious enough for New York. Not sharp enough for Los Angeles. Not bold enough for whatever glamorous life they all liked posting about. My mother told people I was comfortable close to home. My older brother called me suburban by nature. My cousins used country girl like a nickname they thought I'd eventually accept. I smiled a lot in those years. It made people underestimate me. That can be useful. The truth was less flattering to them. I stayed because my grandmother was beginning to decline. Not all at once, not movie style. Slowly, missed appointments, burnt pans. The same story told 4 times in one afternoon. My grandfather had already passed by then. A sudden heart attack while they were on the verge of moving to Florida. That changed the whole direction of her life. They had sold one house, bought another, planned a retirement by the water. Then he died, and she stayed behind in Ohio because leaving felt too much like erasing him. At least that's what she told me once. She stood at the kitchen sink, drying the same plate for too long, and said, "If I leave this house now, it'll feel like he died twice." So she stayed. And then little by little everyone else left too. Not cruelly, just efficiently. My aunt to Manhattan, my cousin to Santa Monica, my brother to Chicago, then Nashville, then wherever his startup friends were moving that year. They called, at first, then less, then mostly on holidays. I was the one who lived close enough to notice what was happening. The unpaid bills under the mail stack, the unwashed hair, the bruise on her wrist from a fall she said was nothing. I started staying over on weekends, then weeknights too. Then one night turned into most nights, and eventually I just moved back in. No announcement, no family meeting. Just my suitcase in the guest room and my laptop on the dining room table. I finished school, I worked remote, supply analytics for a materials firm based in Texas. Not glamorous work, but steady, smart, quietly profitable. By 28 I was making more than any of my relatives guessed. By 30 I was making over $10,000 a month. I never corrected anyone. Not when they looked at my old Honda. Not when they glanced at my plain clothes. Not when my aunt once asked if I needed help getting back on my feet. It wasn't worth explaining. I lived simply because my grandmother's needs changed constantly. Home aids are expensive. Emergency dental work is expensive. Prescription coverage has loopholes you only discover when someone you love is already in pain. So I saved. Aggressively, quietly. My family saw restraint and translated it as limitation. That was their mistake. My grandmother never asked me to stay. That part matters. She didn't beg, didn't guilt me, didn't make me into a martyr. She mostly apologized. Too much. "Hannah, you should be out living," she'd say when I drove her to physical therapy. "Hannah, I'm sorry when I had to miss a weekend trip for work because she had pneumonia. I always told her the same thing. I am living." And I meant it. Not every meaningful life is visible from a rooftop bar. The last 2 years were harder. Her balance worsened. Then her memory. There were good days, sharp days. Days when she still beat me at Scrabble and made comments about my hair like I was 15. And there were other days. Days when she called me by my mother's name. Days when she forgot my grandfather was dead and asked why he was late. On those days, I learned something most families never want to know. Love can be repetitive. Love can be administrative. Love can be boring and exhausting and still be love. The rest of the family visited in bursts. Christmas, milestone birthdays. One cousin flew in once and spent 20 minutes making a video about cherishing legacy before leaving early for a dinner reservation downtown. My brother sent flowers every Mother's Day with cards signed in handwriting that wasn't his. My aunt called from airport lounges and said things like, "You're an angel for doing this." That word always bothered me. Angel. People call women angels when they want to admire sacrifice without participating in it. The first time I realized my family had turned me into a role instead of a person was at Thanksgiving 3 years ago. We were all in the kitchen. My grandmother had gone upstairs to rest. My cousin Brooke was showing everyone pictures from Malibu. My brother was talking about venture capital. And my aunt, smiling into her wine glass, said, "Well, at least Hannah's useful." Everyone laughed. Not maliciously. That almost made it worse. Because casual disrespect is harder to challenge than open cruelty. I didn't say anything then, either. I just reached for the mashed potatoes and kept moving. My grandmother died on a Tuesday at 4:17 in the morning. At home. In her own bed. I was holding her hand. The hospice nurse had stepped out to call the funeral home. The house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator cycle on downstairs. Her breathing slowed, then stopped. There was no revelation, no dramatic last sentence. Just stillness. Real death is often like that. Smaller than people expect. The family came in fast after that. Flights booked, texts sent, photos posted. Suddenly everyone had memories, everyone had grief, everyone had opinions. And now we were in the church fellowship hall after the funeral, standing around with cold coffee and polished sorrow, while the same people who couldn't spare weekends for 7 years were already dismissing the will as meaningless. Until Mr. Adler opened that final document. Then no one moved. Not my mother. Not my brother. Not my aunt with her New York scarf and expensive boots. Not my cousins from LA. Because in a single page my grandmother had turned me from the family's useless country girl into the one person in the room no one could ignore anymore. The room stayed quiet long enough that you could hear the ice melting in the coffee pitchers. Mr. Adler didn't rush. He had practiced law for 40 years, long enough to understand that the moment before the truth lands is often more powerful than the truth itself. My aunt shifted her weight. "Well," she said lightly, "let's just get through the paperwork." My cousin Brooke leaned against the counter, scrolling her phone. "This shouldn't take long." My brother folded his arms. "Grandma didn't really have assets," he said, "just the house." My mother nodded. "And that house needs repairs." There was a tone in her voice. Dismissive, practical. The tone people use when they are certain something has no value. Mr. Adler opened the folder slowly. "I'll begin with the will." He adjusted his glasses. "The primary residence and all personal belongings are left to Hannah." My aunt laughed softly. "Well, that makes sense." Brooke looked up from her phone. "Congratulations," she said. "Enjoy the old house." My brother gave me a sympathetic smile. "You earned it." No one sounded upset, because no one believed the house was worth anything. That was the first miscalculation. Mr. Adler continued, "There is also a financial account attached to the estate." That made my mother look up. "What account?" Mr. Adler turned the page. "A savings account." Brooke shrugged. "Probably for funeral costs." My brother nodded. "Grandma was careful with money." Mr. Adler read the next line. "The balance currently totals $812,000. The silence that followed was not polite. It was absolute. Brooke slowly lowered her phone. My mother blinked. 800... What? Mr. Adler repeated the number calmly. $812,000. My aunt leaned forward. "That can't be right." Mr. Adler slid the statement across the table. The numbers were printed clearly. Years of deposits, years of interest, 20 years of quiet accumulation. My grandmother had been saving long before anyone realized. My brother picked up the paper. "Where did this come from?" Mr. Adler answered without hesitation. "Your grandparents sold their original home 20 years ago and invested the proceeds." My mother frowned. "But they stayed in that house. They rented it back from the buyers," Mr. Adler said. My aunt stared. It was a temporary arrangement," he explained. "They planned to move to Florida after retirement." The room grew still again. Brooke spoke first. "So why didn't they?" Mr. Adler closed the folder halfway. "Your grandfather passed away suddenly before the move. That part of the story most of us knew, but not the rest." My brother rubbed his forehead. "So Grandma just kept the money?" "Yes." "And never told anyone?" Mr. Adler looked at me briefly, then back at the room. "She didn't see the need." My aunt crossed her arms. "That's unbelievable." Brooke leaned closer to the table. "And it all goes to Hannah, yes." My brother looked at me then. Really looked. Like he was seeing me for the first time. "You knew about this?" I shook my head. "No. That part was true. My grandmother had never mentioned the account. Not once." My mother's voice sharpened. "This doesn't make sense." Mr. Adler said nothing. She continued. "Mom wouldn't leave that much money to one person." "She did," he replied. "But why?" No one answered that question. Not right away. Because everyone in the room knew the answer. They just didn't like it. My brother set the paper down slowly. "So, the house and the money." "Yes." "And that's everything?" Mr. Adler paused. "Not quite." My aunt frowned. "What else is there?" He opened the folder again. "There is one additional property." Brooke leaned forward. "What property?" Mr. Adler slid a second document onto the table. "A coastal residence in Florida." The room felt like it tilted slightly. My mother laughed. Florida Brooke grabbed the paper. "Wait, is this a condo?" Mr. Adler shook his head. "A single-family home." My brother stared at the address. "That's oceanfront." "Yes." Brooke's voice dropped. "Do you know what houses there cost?" Mr. Adler nodded. "The current market estimate is between 1.2 and 1.4 million." No one spoke for several seconds. The shift in the room was almost physical. People who had ignored me 5 minutes earlier were now watching every movement I made. My aunt's voice softened. "Hannah, did you know about this?" "No." My mother sat down slowly. "I don't understand." "Mr." Adler closed the folder again. "Your parents purchased the property before your father's death." My brother looked stunned. "They were going to retire there." "Yes. And Grandma never told anyone she preferred privacy." Brooke exhaled slowly. "That's insane." My aunt's eyes moved between me and the papers. "So, all of this belongs to Hannah?" Mr. Adler nodded. "Yes." The air in the room changed again. subtly, but unmistakably, before they had seen me as the quiet girl who stayed behind, the one who never left the suburbs, the one who never seemed ambitious. Now they were calculating something else. Value. My brother was the first to adjust his tone. "Well," he said slowly, "that's a lot to handle for one person." I didn't answer. My mother leaned toward me. "We should talk about what's fair." There it was, the word fairness. It had arrived earlier than expected. Brooke nodded quickly. Grandma probably assumed we'd divide things. My aunt added family's share. I watched them, listened to the new softness in their voices, the careful phrasing, the sudden concern. 7 years of silence replaced in 7 minutes by negotiation. I didn't say anything. Mr. Adler closed the folder completely. "There is one final letter from your grandmother." Every head in the room turned. My brother frowned. A letter, yes, for Hannah. The room went quiet again, because everyone suddenly wanted to know what she had written. Mr. Adler held the envelope for a moment before handing it to me. It was plain, cream-colored, my name written in my grandmother's careful handwriting. Not shaky, not rushed, just steady. The way she had always written grocery lists and birthday cards. The room leaned closer without moving. I felt it. Their attention had shifted completely now. 7 years of absence had suddenly turned into curiosity. My brother cleared his throat. "Go ahead," he said. I didn't answer. I turned the envelope over slowly. My grandmother had sealed it with a strip of clear tape, a practical habit she had picked up during the years when she worried about everything getting lost. I slid my finger under the edge and opened it. The paper inside was folded once. Her handwriting filled the page. The first line made my chest tighten. "Hannah, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to say goodbye properly." I paused. The room was quiet enough that I could hear someone shifting their weight behind me. I continued reading. "I know the family will be surprised by what I left you. I expect they will ask questions." A faint sound escaped my aunt. Not quite a laugh, more like a breath caught halfway. My grandmother's handwriting continued across the page. "I want you to understand something clearly. None of this is a reward." I stopped again. That sentence mattered, because people often misunderstand inheritances. They imagine prizes, recognition. But that wasn't what she was writing. It is simply the truth of who stayed. The words settled into the room like dust. No one interrupted. Not my mother, not my brother, not Brooke. They were all listening now, really listening. I watched carefully these past years. The letter continued. Not just at Hannah, but at everyone. I could feel my mother stiffen beside the table. My grandmother's writing had always been polite, but never soft. "You all built impressive lives in beautiful cities. I was proud of that." A pause. Then the next line. "But pride and presence are not the same thing." My cousin Brooke slowly lowered her gaze. The letter continued. "Hannah never asked me for anything. She never told me what she earned, and I never asked." That part made me smile faintly, because it was true. My grandmother had always believed money was private, something you handled quietly. She lived simply so I would never have to worry. My brother shifted his stance. The air in the room felt heavier now. She gave me time. She gave me patience. She gave me dignity. I read the final lines more slowly. "Those things are not small, and they are not free." My voice stayed steady, but my hands tightened slightly on the paper. If anyone in this room believes Hannah took something from them, they are mistaken. I heard Brooke inhale sharply. She did not take anything. She gave. The letter ended with a single sentence, written in slightly larger handwriting. She stayed. I folded the paper carefully. The silence in the room lasted longer this time. No one spoke first. because no one wanted to be the first person to challenge a dead woman's words. My brother finally cleared his throat. "That's emotional," he said. Emotional. The word landed awkwardly, like a tool used in the wrong situation. My mother stepped forward slightly. "Hannah," she said softly, "we all appreciate what you did. That sentence would have meant more 7 years ago. Now it sounded like preparation." She continued, "But Grandma probably assumed we would handle things together." There it was again. Fairness, shared responsibility, the language of redistribution. Brooke nodded quickly. Families work things out. My aunt added, she might not have realized how complicated this would become. I didn't answer, because the truth was visible in the letter itself. My grandmother had realized exactly how complicated it would become. That was why she had written it. My brother leaned against the table. "No one's saying you didn't do a lot," he said. "But this kind of money..." He gestured toward the bank statement. "Changes things." I looked at him calmly. Changes what he hesitated, then shrugged. It changes expectations. That word hung between us. Expectations. The quiet assumption that family wealth eventually becomes shared wealth. The assumption that someone like me wouldn't keep something that large alone. My aunt placed her hand on my shoulder. Her voice softened. "You're still young, Hannah. Managing property like that can be overwhelming." I didn't move. "It won't be." Brooke tilted her head. "You're planning to keep the Florida house, yes?" She exchanged a quick look with my brother. The calculations were visible now. Market value, vacation potential, investment opportunity. My mother sighed quietly. "Your grandmother probably didn't think about how this might affect the family." I looked down at the letter again, then back at them. She thought about it very carefully. No one spoke after that. Mr. Adler gathered the documents and placed them back in the folder. "Unless there are legal questions," he said calmly, "the estate transfer will proceed as written." No one objected, not immediately, but the room had changed again, not silent, strategic. The conversations that followed were quieter, more controlled, because everyone understood the same thing now. The girl they had ignored for 7 years had just become the most valuable person in the room, and the real arguments hadn't even started yet. The room didn't explode after the letter. That would have been easier. People expect anger when money appears, raised voices, tables slammed, but families that care about appearances rarely behave that way in public. Instead, the shift was quieter, more calculated. Conversations lowered into careful tones, words chosen like steps across thin ice. My brother picked up the bank statement again. He read the numbers slowly this time. $800,000. The Florida property, the house in Ohio, the kind of assets people in our family usually talked about in hypotheticals. My mother broke the silence. "Hannah," she said gently, "we should probably sit down as a family soon." Her voice was soft, almost maternal. It hadn't sounded like that toward me in years. I didn't answer right away. Mr. Adler began stacking the papers back into his folder. He had seen this moment before, the moment when grief quietly gives way to negotiation. Brooke spoke next. "We're not trying to take anything from you." That sentence usually means the opposite. My aunt nodded. "It's just that Grandma probably didn't consider the bigger picture." I tilted my head slightly. "What bigger picture?" my brother answered. "Family balance." There was that word again. Balance, fairness, shared outcomes. The language people reach for when the math suddenly benefits someone else. "You're the only one named," he continued. "That doesn't mean the rest of us shouldn't be involved." I watched him carefully. Not angry, just curious, because this was the first time in years he had looked directly at me for longer than a greeting. "You want to be involved now?" I said. My voice stayed calm. Not accusing, just factual. Brooke crossed her arms. Well, none of us knew Grandma had this kind of money. That's true. My aunt leaned forward. You could split the savings. My mother nodded. And maybe the Florida house could stay in the family. The room went still again, because they had moved from suggestion to proposal. 7 years of absence had turned into immediate interest. I folded my grandmother's letter again and placed it back in the envelope. I haven't decided anything yet. That was technically true. But it wasn't the answer they were hoping for. My brother exhaled slowly. Hannah, you have to understand how this looks. How what looks? It looks like you're keeping everything. I didn't respond, because that was exactly what the will said. Mr. Adler closed the folder. The estate will transfer according to the document your grandmother signed. His voice was calm, neutral, legal. Brooke glanced at him. Wills can be contested. That was the first openly aggressive sentence in the room. My aunt shot her a quick look, but the thought had already been spoken aloud. Mr. Adler adjusted his glasses. Yes, he said, they can. Brooke lifted her chin slightly. So that's an option. My brother looked uncomfortable. Let's not jump there yet. But the idea had landed. Once money enters a room, possibilities multiply. My mother turned toward me again. Hannah, sweetheart. That word felt unfamiliar. You know Grandma loved all of us. I nodded. Yes. So she wouldn't want this to divide the family. That was the argument they had arrived at. Not entitlement, unity, the emotional version of fairness. I looked around the room slowly. My brother, my aunt, my cousins, my mother. 7 years of absence condensed into a single afternoon of negotiation. I don't think Grandma was confused about what she wanted, I said. My voice stayed even. My brother rubbed his forehead. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Am I? Yes. Brooke leaned forward. You can't expect everyone to just walk away. I met her eyes. Walk away from what she hesitated, then gestured toward the papers. This. I almost smiled, because that word had replaced something else. 7 years ago they had called me useful. Now they called the money this. My aunt sighed. This isn't how families work. Before I could answer, a chair scraped softly against the floor. Someone had stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. Every head turned. It was my Uncle Daniel, the quietest person in the room. He had spent most of the afternoon sitting near the wall, listening, watching. He wore a dark suit that still held the posture of military training. Because before retiring last year, he had been a 2-star general in the Army. He rarely interrupted family conversations. But when he did, people listened. He stepped forward now. His voice was calm, measured. I think we should stop. No one spoke. Not Brooke, not my brother, not my mother. He looked around the room slowly, at every face. Then he said something that shifted the entire direction of the afternoon. None of you have the right to question this. My Uncle Daniel stood beside the long folding table with his hands loosely clasped in front of him. He wasn't tall in an intimidating way, but he carried the kind of posture that made people straighten their backs without realizing why. Years in the military do that to a person. You learn how to speak in rooms where no one wants to hear the truth. He looked first at my mother, then at my brother, then at Brooke. His voice stayed calm. I think we should stop. No one argued. Even Brooke, who had been the most outspoken a minute earlier, lowered her gaze slightly. My uncle continued. Before anyone says another word about fairness or division. He paused. Not dramatically. Just long enough for everyone to pay attention. There's something you should all remember. My aunt folded her arms. What's that supposed to mean? He turned to her. It means none of us were here. The sentence landed quietly. but it hit harder than raised voices would have. My brother shifted his weight. "That's not true," he said. "We visited." Uncle Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes." He didn't argue. He didn't correct him. He simply asked a question. "How many days?" My brother hesitated. "What? How many days did you spend here in the last 7 years?" No one answered. Not because the math was difficult, because the number would sound embarrassing if spoken aloud. My uncle continued, "I was in Afghanistan for part of that time." His voice stayed steady. "I wasn't here either." He looked down briefly, the first hint of regret passing across his face. "That's something I'll regret for the rest of my life." The room stayed still, because this was the first time anyone had admitted fault instead of deflecting it. My aunt cleared her throat. "Well, everyone had their lives." "Yes," he said, "we did." He turned toward me then. "And while we were busy living them..." He gestured toward the old house. "Hannah stayed." My brother ran a hand through his hair. "That doesn't mean..." My uncle raised his hand slightly. Not aggressively, just enough to stop him. "It means exactly what it means." The room fell quiet again. My uncle looked toward Mr. Adler. "The will is legal." Mr. Adler nodded. "Yes. No irregularities, none. Witnesses present when it was signed?" "Yes." My uncle nodded once, then he turned back to the rest of the family. "Then the matter is finished." Brooke leaned forward. "But no." The word was not loud, but it ended the sentence before it began. He looked around the room again. "I've spent my career watching people argue about responsibility." His voice stayed calm. "But responsibility is easy to measure." He nodded toward me. "You show up." No one spoke. My uncle continued. "Hannah didn't take anything from this family." He paused, then said something that surprised even me. "She carried something the rest of us set down." My mother looked uncomfortable. "That's not fair." My uncle's expression didn't change. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." Then he said the sentence that stopped the conversation completely. Fair would have been sharing the work. No one responded, because that version of fairness had never been offered. My uncle stepped closer to the table. His tone softened slightly. "Hannah didn't ask for this money." He tapped the letter gently. "Your mother gave it to her." My brother stared at the floor. Brooke crossed her arms again, but this time she didn't speak. My uncle looked directly at me. "Hannah." I met his eyes. "Yes, I'm sorry." The room shifted again. That apology carried weight, because it wasn't symbolic. It was specific. "I should have been here more," he said. "I was chasing promotions and deployments." His voice remained steady. "But that doesn't change what you did." He looked around the room once more. "If anyone here thinks about contesting that will..." He paused. Not threatening, just clear. "I will personally make sure Hannah has the best legal representation available." Mr. Adler nodded slightly. Brooke opened her mouth, then closed it again, because the calculation had changed. Legal battles are expensive, and Uncle Daniel had just removed any uncertainty about who he would support. My aunt sighed. "This is getting dramatic." "No," he said quietly. "It's getting honest." The room fell silent again. Not tense, just settled. The arguments that had seemed inevitable 10 minutes earlier now felt pointless. My brother finally looked up. His voice sounded tired. "So that's it?" My uncle nodded. "That's it." No one moved for several seconds. Then Mr. Adler gathered his papers. The estate process would continue, but the real decision had already been made. Because sometimes the most powerful moment in a family argument is when someone finally says the obvious truth, and no one else can deny it. The room emptied slowly after that. No one rushed out. But no one stayed long either. The energy had changed. Arguments that seemed ready to ignite an hour earlier had quietly dissolved under the weight of something simpler. Truth tends to do that. My aunt left first. She hugged my mother near the door and avoided looking at me. Brooke followed soon after, whispering something about catching an evening flight back to Los Angeles. My brother lingered longer. He stood near the coffee table with his hands in his pockets, staring at the stack of papers Mr. Adler had packed away. He looked like someone trying to adjust to a new map after realizing he'd been traveling the wrong direction. Finally, he walked over. "Hannah." His voice sounded careful, like he wasn't sure what tone to use. "Yes," he shifted his weight. "I didn't realize things were that intense here." I nodded once. They were. Another pause. He looked toward the living room hallway, the place where my grandmother had spent most of the last few years. "I should have come more." The sentence hung there, half apology, half observation. I didn't push him to finish it, because sometimes the first step toward honesty is simply admitting the obvious. "I'm glad you're saying that now," I said. He nodded slowly. "Yeah." Then he glanced toward the door where our uncle stood talking quietly with Mr. Adler. Daniel was pretty direct. That's one word for it. My brother almost smiled. Guess he always was. For a moment we stood there in the quiet room. Two people who had grown up in the same house but had lived very different adult lives. Then he asked something I hadn't expected. "Were you happy here?" The question surprised me, not because it was difficult, because no one had asked it before. I thought about it for a second, about the long evenings, the hospital visits, the mornings when my grandmother forgot my name. "Yes," I said. He looked confused. "Really, yes." How I shrugged slightly. Because she mattered. That answer seemed to settle something in him. He nodded again. "I guess that's something I missed." Then he reached out and squeezed my shoulder once, not dramatically, just briefly, and walked toward the door. My mother remained near the hallway, watching everything. When the room had finally emptied, she approached me. Her voice was quieter now. "Hannah?" "Yes." "I wish things had been different." I looked at her. "They could have been." She nodded. Then she looked down at the letter in my hand. "Your grandmother was stubborn?" "Yes, that's where you get it." For the first time that afternoon, we both smiled slightly. Not warmly, but honestly. She sighed. "Well?" Another pause. "I suppose you'll be busy now. With what, the house in Florida?" "Yes." She looked thoughtful. "You should go see it soon." "I will." Then she did something unexpected. She hugged me. Not long, not emotional. Just a brief, quiet embrace. When she stepped back, she looked older than she had earlier that morning. Loss does that. So does realization. Eventually, she left too. The house fell quiet again. The same quiet that had filled it the night my grandmother passed away. I walked into the living room. The late afternoon light slanted through the windows. The chair where she used to sit remained in the corner, her blanket folded neatly over the arm. I sat there for a moment, thinking, not about the money, not about the Florida house, about the years, 7 of them, years that had looked small from the outside, but had contained thousands of ordinary moments, pills organized on a Tuesday, doctor appointments on rainy Thursdays, Scrabble games on good days, holding her hand on the bad ones. Most of that work had never been visible to anyone else. But it had mattered, and my grandmother had understood that. That was the real inheritance. The money and property were simply the proof she had left behind. Later that evening, Uncle Daniel came back inside after finishing his conversation with Mr. Adler. He leaned against the doorway. "You holding up, yes." He nodded. Then he said something I didn't expect. "You know, when I was stationed overseas, we used to say something about people who stayed behind. What was that?" They're the ones holding the ground. I thought about that for a moment. It felt accurate, not heroic, just steady. He looked around the quiet house. Your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing. Yes, I said. She did. A month after the funeral, I stood on the back porch of the Florida house for the first time. The ocean was quieter than I expected. Not silent, just steady. A low rhythm moving against the shore. My grandparents had bought the house 20 years earlier, before retirement, before illness, before plans changed. It was smaller than the pictures made it look. 2 bedrooms, white walls, a porch facing the water. Simple, practical. Exactly the kind of place my grandfather would have chosen. The realtor had given me the keys earlier that morning. When I opened the door, the air inside smelled faintly like salt and old wood. Not abandoned, just waiting. There were a few pieces of furniture, a table, 2 chairs, a worn sofa facing the window. My grandmother must have kept the place maintained even while living in Ohio. That thought made me smile. She had always been careful like that. Quiet preparation, no announcements, no need for approval. I walked through the room slowly, touching the walls, opening the windows, listening to the ocean. For a moment I imagined them here together. My grandfather making coffee. My grandmother standing at the sink looking out toward the water. It had been their plan, just delayed by life. I stepped onto the porch and sat down. The breeze moved lightly through the palm trees. It felt calm, not like victory, not like revenge, just space. Later that afternoon my phone rang. It was my brother, Hannah. Hi, I just wanted to check in. About what, the house? I looked out toward the ocean. It's beautiful. He was quiet for a second. I'm glad. Another pause. Then he said something unexpected. I've been thinking about Grandma's letter. Yes, she was right. That sentence carried more weight than any apology. I should have been there. I didn't argue, because the truth didn't need reinforcement. He continued. Daniel called me yesterday. What did he say? He told me something about responsibility. That sounded like my uncle. What kind of responsibility, I asked. The kind you don't get credit for. I nodded. That sounds accurate. My brother laughed softly. Yeah. The conversation was shorter than it might have been years ago, but it felt more honest. When we hung up, I stayed on the porch a little longer. The sun was starting to lower over the water. I thought about the word my family had used for me for years. Useless. It had sounded harmless when they said it, almost playful. But labels like that can shape how people see you, and how they treat you. My grandmother had seen through it. That was the real reason she wrote the letter. Not to punish anyone, not to start a fight, just to record the truth. Later that evening, I placed her letter on the small table near the window, beside a framed photo of her and my grandfather. The ocean breeze moved gently through the room. For the first time in years, my life felt wide again. Not because of the money, not because of the house, because the quiet work of those 7 years had finally been understood. And sometimes that's the only recognition that matters. If you're listening to this story and something in it feels familiar, maybe you've been the person who stayed behind too. The one who handled the difficult days. The one people overlooked because your work didn't look glamorous. If that's you, remember something my grandmother understood better than anyone. The strongest people in a family are often the quiet ones, the ones who show up, the ones who stay. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories about real people, real families, and the complicated ways love shows up in everyday life, don't forget to follow the channel. Sometimes the people who look invisible are the ones holding everything together. And sometimes the truth just needs the right moment to be written down.